Now there's a lower level of distress that we can use EMDR with. If you imagine a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being an experience or memory is not at all distressing, just doesn't bother you, no upset whatsoever. 10 out of 10 you couldn't imagine being any more distressed. That's the most distress you could feel. It simply doesn't make any sense to use EMDR with memories that are not distressing. You know, there needs to be a baseline level of distress for this to be a meaningful thing to be doing with somebody, for even for us to be having this conversation, or for you to come and see me. So let's assume that the lower level of distress that we can meaningfully work with is something like, let's say, 3 or 4 out of 10. Anything less than that just really doesn't matter. Okay? So let's say this is where it is, you know, you're telling me about the bad experience, it's around 3 or 4 out of 10 at a minimum. I ask you these questions, and there's a very good chance that when you become tuned into that memory network, the level of distress naturally rises, because we usually keep this stuff pushed off to the side, and here I am asking you to bring it into the centre of your awareness, and so the level of distress will naturally rise with that. It might go up to, say, 5 out of 10. Then I get you to focus on the visual picture that goes with the worst moment, and then follow my hand backwards and forwards, and while your eyes are moving backwards and forwards, like I said, the level of distress may go down quickly, may go down slowly, may plateau, may go higher. And each of those things can happen. So, we stop after 20 or 30 seconds, get you to take a deep breath, find out what's come up for you, get you to refocus on that, then we do it again. Now again, the same thing may happen. The distress may go down really fast, it may go down slowly, may plateau, may go higher. And this may continue. Now, just like there's a lower level of distress that we can effectively work with, there's also an upper level of distress that we can effectively work with. And let's call that 10 out of 10 on that distress scale. Anything above 10 out of 10 is basically going to be re-traumatising for you. And there's nothing therapeutic about being re-traumatised, and that's definitely not what we're aiming for. If you ever feel that things are around that 10 out of 10 region, or above 10 out of 10, that's when you may need to say stop. And keep in mind that you've got the power and the right to say stop at any moment. Also keep in mind that I've rarely ever seen people need to do that. So it's very rare. It can happen. It's just not likely to happen with you or anybody else, but it can happen. So you need to retain the knowledge that you have the right and the power to say stop. Now, how do you know if things are right up there at 10 out of 10? Well, if you're feeling so overwhelmed by the distress that's coming up for you while we're working with that difficult memory, to such an extent like you feel like you can't cope, then that's a pretty good indicator that you're approaching or you're entering that re-traumatisation land, and that's when you need to say stop. As I said, there's nothing therapeutic about being re-traumatised. All it does is add to the burden of distress that you're carrying around. So it's definitely not what we're aiming for. So what this suggests is that there's a therapeutic window. There's the lower level parameter that EMDR makes sense to work with, and there's also the upper level parameter that EMDR makes sense to work with. Anything within those two parameters is the therapeutic window, and we can work therapeutically with anything that comes up in terms of the level of distress within that. Below that bottom parameter, it just doesn't matter, and above that, it's way too distressing and traumatising. Now, judging by what I see you displaying when we're going through this is not necessarily the best indicator to me of where you are on that scale from 0 to 10. Some people display their emotions very easily and very readily, and they may cry quite naturally lots of times, and they might cry several times during each day, and it's no big deal to them. It might feel like a cleansing and a unburdening and a releasing and a letting go. Whereas other people may be very reluctant, they simply never show any emotion to themselves or anybody else, and while we're undergoing the EMDR process, they may be going through extremely intense emotions, but they simply don't show it. So if I'm just to judge purely by what I see the person displaying, I could be wildly wrong. I could think they're absolutely fine with where the process is going for them. I might think they're sort of down like 5 or 6 out of 10, whereas in fact they might be up at 9 or 10 out of 10. Or the person that is very free and comfortable with their emotions, I might think, oh no, they're right up at 9 or 10 out of 10, whereas in fact they might be down at 4 or 5 out of 10, they're absolutely fine. So what this means to me is that I need to be guided by your judgment about where you are in that process, where you are on that scale. So again, it comes back to being, if you feel like you simply can't cope with what's coming up, you're feeling overwhelmed, then you need to say stop, because you're the best judge of what you can and can't cope with. EMDR seems to be especially good at preventing people from being overwhelmed. In fact, that seems to be the therapeutic trick.